Welcome back to Be a Better Leader. I'm Dr. AJ Lee, a manager of customer success and learning implementation strategist at FranklinCovey, the world's most trusted leadership company. Over the last few episodes of this season, we've been focusing on how you as a manager and leader can communicate more effectively. Those conversations have covered how to prepare for and hold difficult conversations, leveraging the power of effective one-on-ones, and the necessity of being sure that you're building all of this communication on a foundation of trust. Today, we're going to dive into explore your communication during what can really be one of those make or break moments, communicating during times of change. To help us, we've invited Marché Pleshette, a world-class FranklinCovey senior consultant, keynote speaker, certified executive coach, and co-author of the best-selling book, Change: How to Turn Uncertainty into Opportunity. Marché, welcome.
Thank you so much, AJ. Very happy to be here with you.
Absolutely. So, Marché, before we get going deep into how leaders can more effectively communicate during times of change, I want to start with the why for communicating during these periods of time. In the workplace, I'm sure the majority of those listeners would admit that they have experienced change in the past and or are currently navigating through some level of change. So the question is, why is communicating with your people so important during times of change?
Yeah. So it's really, I would say it's beyond important. It's imperative because change is such a human phenomenon. And I think oftentimes we think that change is just like processes are going to be different. There's this different goal that we're trying to reach. Let me just tell a person or tell my team how to do it and they'll do it. But it is so far more deep than that. And I think anybody listening can probably relate, as you've just said, to the jarring experience that we sometimes have with change. I will say I'm hearing and seeing more than ever people say that they're okay with change. They're not as frazzled, but the process of getting through it is not always so easy. And communication makes a huge difference. People get a chance to understand what's changing, what does that mean for them, and understand, what's they just need to know when change happens. People, that human part of us, need to understand some things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Change is an imperative, is what you shared,
Yes.
right? And we often say, building on that, that change is inevitable as well,
That's
two
right.
eyes. So thinking about that and knowing the importance of why we should be communicating as leaders for those that are facing an upcoming change, is there any advice that you would give them as they begin to think about how to prep and actually share the news with their team and communicate effectively throughout those experiences?
Leaders are people too. And one of the things that I've found is a lot of times as leaders, it's like we know as leaders, we're responsible for outcomes or getting outcomes done through other people. But a lot of times we're not as comfortable, we're not as clear, we're not as, we don't understand everything about the change. And we're conveying or trying to communicate something that we don't quite get yet. So the first thing that I would say is get as clear as you can yourself as a leader. That's the first and foremost thing. The other thing that I would say is we don't want to be alarmist, but a really good leader also is constantly looking for what's happening, staying abreast, and not. I mean, change is happening so quickly now, and it's happening at a like a layered pace. It's not just one change that people experience. We want to make sure that we're looking at what's possible and we're prepping our people for just understanding some things are happening in the economy, some things are happening in the organization, some things are happening in our industry, and some of it is they're indicators that changes we're gonna need to make a change, or change is probably going to happen to us. So just kind of starting to prep people for it even before it actually happens, but getting super clear and creating a compelling case for change so that people don't feel like they just got caught off guard.
Right, right. Getting clear. And then I love that you said looking for what's possible as well, really seeing it from the perspective of opportunity, which is in the title, right? Change
Yeah,
as opportunity.
yeah,
And what about those leaders though within that? Because I'm thinking about we jump straight into what they should do for others. What about those leaders that get the news and they're feeling some type of way about the
right.
change? How what do you recommend they consider doing in order to even be able to, with integrity, communicate with their teams about the change?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, it's so important for us to get as much clarity as we can ourselves. And I've already mentioned like leaders are people too. So, we have reactions to change. And one of the things that we have discovered is there are 5 common reactions to change that anybody might have. And probably there are far more that we could name, like freak out. But there are 5 common reactions. And I think that it's important for any leader to think about themselves. How am I feeling? And to be able to work through it. I've already said, and this applies to everybody, leaders and individual contributors. So it's the same. But then I also do have recommendations for how leaders lead others through change. But it's important for us to lead ourselves.
Mhm.
So get as much clarity, pause, because our brains can get hijacked. So get as much clarity as you can, make sense of, and get the why is this changing? What does that mean for me? And exactly what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And being real with ourselves about the fact that this is not something that you're excited about, and just kind of dealing with getting some clarity about like what might be good about this, what might not be good about this, what might be the obstacles, what's one thing, if I've got to champion this, what's one thing that I could see that could be the benefit about this, right? So just it's some self-talk. It's interesting because as leaders we're not necessarily, some people could be, we're not psychologists, but there's the psychology to change. And a big part of that is what we talk about in the change book. There's this predictable pattern of change. And when we understand that, even as leaders, we can understand where we are in the change process. We can understand what our reactions are. And by the way, I love that you're asking as leaders, what do we need to do first? you know, we don't want to, if we let our people know that we're afraid of the change or we don't like it, you're just going to get pushed back. But if we could work through the process ourselves, we actually have a compelling and encouraging story for them that I know also that this isn't, I felt equally as shocked or a little bit fearful, but I see that this could really be beneficial and being able to convey that.
Marche, I appreciate you just going and helping us reflect and understand the importance of doing the work ourselves before we go in front of our teams to position the change. And you mentioned having a compelling story to tell as one of those first steps that we should be able to pull forward after we've gathered the data. We're as clear as possible about the change. We've flipped it to the positive. We're looking for what's possible and then presenting that in a way with our teams that is compelling. So, what are some best practices to start those types of conversations? Are there any specific settings you've seen from your experiences that would be best? Is it best to send an email? Is it best to mention it in a team meeting? What are some areas or recommendations you would share with other leaders?
So I think it's already jarring enough when we say, let's have a meeting. I'd like to share with you some changes. Like when we throw that out, that's already like people start to create stories themselves. So that's already challenging enough. I don't know that sending an email about the change is the best. I think that it is best conveyed in person. So in a team meeting, or perhaps one on one with people if it is a singular experience that a person will be having with change. But I think that that is really helpful. And conveying in that team meeting, if you will, and it may not be the routine team meeting. It may be let's kind of have a little huddle so that I could share with you all, some things that are really important to convey today, or whatever it happens to be. Um, I think in that, it really is. That's why we want to think about the compelling case. We want to think about and be able to convey, we've been struggling with this, or we have had a challenge with this. And so there is this solution or strategy that we have to address it. That could be a system, it could be an acquisition, it could be a merger, whatever the change is. And share, this is why. Never ever just tell people, and I always say there's a difference in conveying something and communicating. So you don't want to just say, hey, let me convey, this is changing and this is the deal, so have a nice day. You really do want to communicate in a meeting face to face, give people the opportunity to ask questions, um, understand the human part of this, not make anybody bad for their reaction or their response. Understand that there's time that they will need to process the change. And as leaders, we want to make that time as short as possible, because the time that it takes to process it costs money, it costs um, productivity, it costs. It slows things down. So we want to manage that, but we've got to manage it in the most um, accommodating way, because what we're trying to do is engage people and get them to join us in the change.
And say that someone's following through this experience, and they've taken their notes and they've done all the steps. They did the inner work. They stepped in and did the prep before presenting to their team. They went in person per your recommendation and shared the news. And then they get resistance. Do you have any tips for navigating that resistance? Because you mentioned that the time that it takes to get everyone on the same page costs related to that. Is there anything you've seen from the global clients you've worked with, or your experiences on how best to manage and navigate through that resistance from maybe a select few team members?
Yeah, yeah. So it's exactly what we're talking about. It's communication is imperative. It's key. And it is understanding that people have various reactions and none are necessarily bad. And I don't know if anybody has had the opportunity yet to have read the book, but there's a person who's ready to roll and they move. There's a person who is going to minimally do what needs to change. Like, they don't really love it, so they're going to minimally do it, but nothing much. They're not going to try to figure anything out. They'll just do what is told to them. There's a person who waits to see how this is going to impact everybody else. There's the person who resists, as you're asking about, and they don't like that this is happening, and they have some reasons why they don't. And then there are people who quit. And so none of them, except for a person who quits and stays in place, they all have their advantages and disadvantages. There are good and bads. There are things that work and don't for all of them. So I'm saying that because we've got to validate even those persons who resist, because maybe there's something that they're seeing, or there's a reason that they can convey that we need to consider. And so it is really talking to them, asking, what is it that what is it that is challenging to them? What is it that they see will be the greatest obstacle? What's one thing that they see that might be positive, right? Asking them, if for whatever the obstacle is that they see, is there any suggestion that they have for moving beyond that, right? So it really is about talking to them, and engaging them. Because I want to share one other thing as I'm thinking about this. By the time changes, by the time we're introducing change to people as managers, it's already been thought about, analyzed, processed, strategized, right? And we're just saying this is happening. The team members had nothing to do with it. Oftentimes, as leaders, we didn't either. So the change is probably not going to change back. But we need them to get through. And that means we've got to engage them in that process. Everybody, we need all hands on deck. So it really is about having good conversations, finding out what is working, what isn't working, giving them, the strategy, but leaving it up to team members to have some ideas about, and try different things and maybe fail at a couple of things, but show others like this did not work. But we've got to get them involved. And that's why the communication, no matter what the responses are, it's not about condemning them, but enrolling them, engaging them. And that doesn't happen if we just push them to the side.
So well said. And I was taking notes here too, because the questions that you posed and the way that it's framed just emulated and was a perfect example of empathy, having empathy for wherever someone
That's
is on that continuum, on those reactions to that change. And your question around what's the greatest obstacle you see and navigating the change, that's putting ownership on that person on your team and inviting them into the conversation. Like you said, they likely didn't have any influence over before that moment, which may be all they need, right? They might just have wanted to be heard. They might want to have a stretch project and help the team navigate through it. Who knows what that conversation could open up with that curiosity. I think that is just such a powerful point, because a lot of leaders can easily get into that kind of dictator control mindset where they try to just push everyone through versus
Yes.
inviting them in. So.
And by the way, that doesn't work. That does not work. And studies actually show, a McKinsey study actually shows that over 70% of most change actually fails, as in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. And I think part of that is just because there is this lack of communication, there is this lack of partnership. And it's like we're just telling people or throwing change at people, and we've got to do it differently. We can do change. We can do change well.
I feel like that's the nail on the head. We can do change well. You listening can do change well by putting some of these principles and tactics and tools that Marché's shown into practice as well. Wow. Marché, thank you so much for this time and your insight shared.
Thank you so much, AJ. It's been a joy to be here.
For anyone who would like to learn more on this topic, you can download our free guide, How to Communicate Change, a tool for leaders. You can also find a link in the show notes or visit FranklinCovey.com for more information as well as resources. Till next time.